Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
Good evening, welcome to the Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. Piet my vrou. There's a particular way you say it in Vangeli. Piet my vrou, that's the call.
Yeah.
And that's because calling the road red-chested cuckoo wouldn't be nearly as interesting. That's the official title.
Makes sense.
All right, away from avian, I almost said influenza, because that's the only time we've spoken about birds on the Money Show, and to matters more important. A big, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, but an astonishing kind of retraction from the Minister of Mineral Resources and Petroleum today, Gwede Mantashe. I mean, just astonishing to make proposals and then remove two of the most contentious ones with no sort of explanation, no comment, no kind of analysis or greater understanding of why this happened. I must just point out, though, the Minerals Council still says that the draft of the new proposals won't actually make much difference. They say that this will still hinder investment, one of the big stories that we're going to be looking at in about 5 minutes from now. I saw today that Mango Airlines might soon be back in the sky. And there's been a little bit of reporting on this over the last week, a little bit of activity around people who own tickets, actually had tickets before it went into business rescue and then eventually stopped flying, and people have been contacting them. I just want to say this. So I've flown SAA once in the last year since it restarted, and I did have a sense of nostalgia. SAA was a big long-term brand, had been going for a very, very long time. But Mango, not so much. And I just wonder now, to try and bring in, and this would go for any kind of low-cost airline now, I think that would be a tough ask. And I just wonder how wise it is. And I realize there may be assets, there may be workers, I understand all of that. I still just wonder how wise it is to actually try and bring in this airline at this point in our aviation kind of industry where things are. I mean, maybe it'll bring prices down. That'll be great. But it's so competitive at the moment. And we've heard earlier, I think last week, our airlines around the world aren't making a huge amount of money, and particularly on our continent. So we'll talk about that. And Saki Makrozoma will be your shapeshifter this evening. Someone who's had a very long history, but done many, many things. Currently chair of Vodacom, been on many boards, involved in mining as well, of course. But before that, has a deep political history. There's a lot to talk to him about. Your calls this evening, please, on 011 8830 702 021 446 0567, and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM, streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, confirmation in the Government Gazette that the Mineral Resources and Petroleum Minister Gwede Mantashe has made two quite significant changes to the proposed amendments to the Mineral Resources Development Bill. The first draft required mining companies to have an empowerment partner to qualify for a prospecting right. It also said that companies had to get the minister's approval if their ownership changed, even if that company was owned by investors outside the country. Peter Leon is a mining expert and partner at the law firm Herbert Smith Freehills. Peter, good evening to you. I really appreciate the time. As you explained previously, the idea that a minister could determine who owned a company was never going to work. Do you think the minister's just bowing to the inevitable here?
Hi, good evening, Stephen. I think he is, but what's really interesting is that, after this bill was published, he spoke at the Johannesburg Junior Mining Indaba and said that empowerment was not a requirement for prospecting rights, which was actually completely contradictory to what was in the bill that he himself had published a few days before. So it's possible that he hadn't actually read what was in the legislation, or that he suddenly changed his mind as a result of all the protest and concern that this has raised with the industry in the response from the Minerals Council.
It's such a strange thing. I mean, it raises all sorts of questions, and there'll be people reading tea leaves about what comes out of the department. And this is not what should happen. But knowing, someone as experienced as Minister Mantashe, it seems unlikely to me that he would allow something he hadn't read to be published.
Well, I would have thought so, but the statement he made at this conference seemed to indicate that he was of the view that prospecting did not require empowerment, and actually that makes sense from his perspective, because you might recall when the last version of the mining charter came out in 2018, it was just become a minister, empowerment was removed from prospecting rights. There was always been some debate about whether or not it applied. It was discretionary under the Act, and he made it clear in that version of the mining charter that it would not apply. So it was very, very surprising to see it back in the legislation when this bill was published a few weeks ago.
The clause around, a ministerial approval for a change of ownership in a company, I mean, that was never really going to fly. I mean, that surely would have fallen at sort of the first court case against it. It would also have just had such a stifling impact on investment.
Well, exactly, because, effectively what it would do is it would basically make the Act, the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act, operate extraterritorially. That's the one aspect of it. But the second is you have the situation where a government minister could effectively interfere in transactions which are taking place on a stock exchange, not necessarily in Johannesburg, but in London or anywhere else in the world. That made no economic sense. And in fact, when the legislation was first passed by Parliament in 2002, that was a specific exception around listed companies, which has always been in the law. So it was very, very strange to see it being brought in this proposed amendment.
These were the two most contentious clauses. Certainly in the analysis that I saw, they occupied most of the space. The Minerals Council says it still believes the other proposals would, I think the phrase they used was, prevent the industry from reaching its full potential. Are there other clauses that are legally problematic in your view?
Yeah, there's a number of things, Stephen. One is, there's a proposal to make the Codes of Good Practice and the Housing and Living Conditions Standard, which were very controversial when they were published a long time ago, around 2009, to make them part of the law, and I think part of the Act. And I think that's certainly a concern the Minerals Council would have. The other thing is very vague provisions around beneficiation. Basically, the bill says, as currently drafted, obviously it might change once it's gone through the public comment process in the next 2 months, it says that mining companies must make provision for domestic beneficiation, that is, i.e. domestic processing, on a completely unspecified basis when they're granted a mining right. So that injects a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability in the legislation, which is clearly not desirable.
Go on?
So I was also going to say that in relation to mine dumps, those are mine tailings. That currently those are excluded from the Act, but under this draft bill, you have 2 years within which to apply for a mining right in respect of those tailings or dumps, failing which they are expropriated, which is certainly very undesirable from an investor or mining company's perspective.
No, sure. Would all of that survive a legal challenge? I mean, we know the industry said, and look, at the time, the headlines were all about the two contentious clauses, or the two most contentious clauses. The ministry basically seemed to say to the minister, we're going to our lawyers, and the minister seemed to say, great, let's do that. Do you believe that there'll be strong ground for a challenge on the proposals as they are now?
Yes, I think there would be, and I think I have the sense the minister senses that. I actually, frankly, I have never heard of a government minister publishing a correction to a draft bill in the Government Gazette weeks after the bill itself had been published. So I think that's a straw in the wind in a sense. I would expect there will be a lot of changes to this bill in the next 2 months. The Minerals Council will be hard at it, negotiating those changes with the ministry.
Peter Leon, thank you very much indeed. Mining expert and partner at Herbert Smith Freehills. Well, that I didn't know, that a minister hardly ever, I mean, it may have happened, but when you're talking to someone of the caliber of Peter Leon, you think you would know if a correction had been published in this way before. Certainly very, very unusual. Does seem to tell us all sorts of things about this.
7:02. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
An update in Parliament from the DTIC Minister Parks now talks with the US around tariffs. As I understand it, we've now asked the Trump administration to keep tariffs at the current 10% level or to reduce them. Also pointing out, though, this is Tao pointing out, that it's unlikely we'll have a full trade deal with the US by July the 9th. That's when the current tariff pause will expire. We do, of course, have tariffs of 25% on our imports of cars, aluminium and steel into the US. Duane Newman is the EY partner that specializes in global trade. Duane, good evening. I realize predicting the behavior of the Trump administration is impossible. From what we know of the talks, does it sound to you like we're making some kind of progress? At least we seem to be talking.
Yeah, Stephen. So I think talking is always a good start with the American administration. I think we've come quite a far way since the before the meeting in Washington in the White House. So I think at least there is a deal. They are talking. I suppose the big issue for us as South Africans and where we export to the US, obviously we do know that obviously quite a bit of our exports are obviously exempt. The critical minerals, platinum, titanium. Obviously, platinum is obviously I think over 30% of our exports to the US. That's obviously a really big number. So that's not going to be covered by these by the tariffs. Obviously we've got the 25% tariff on aluminium. It's obviously gone to 50%, which is obviously I suppose concerning. And then we've obviously got I suppose the products which are going to be I suppose impacted by these reciprocal tariffs that are 10%. Going, I suppose, in theory, up on the 9th of July if we don't do a deal. Obviously, we did hear, I think, last night that the U.S. courts did delay the legality of the tariffs. I think that decision is delayed to the 31st of July. I understand there'll be another court case heard where they'll decide on whether those duties, reciprocal duties, Liberation Day duties are legal or not. So I suppose we'll probably really have to wait till that court case is heard. So I suppose the biggest risk we've got at this point is probably between the 9th and the 31st of July. And I suppose then the court in the US is going to really decide, I suppose, for all countries exporting to the US, on whether those reciprocal duties will still be in place after the 31st of July.
There's so many elements to all of this, right? It would seem obviously unlikely that we get a deal by the 9th, less than a month from now. And at the same time, Washington is talking to a whole host of countries all at once. So,
Yes, right.
Even a machinery as big as that isn't going to be able to give us full attention. So there needs to be some kind of temporary something somewhere.
Well, I suppose the question would be, obviously it's been said that we've got this 90-day hiatus. I think we all know it's impossible to negotiate all those trade deals with all those countries in that period of time. So I think something will happen. What will happen? I think is anybody's guess. Maybe for the countries that have got some kind of offer or they've started, I suppose, serious negotiations, there might be some extension. But I think at this point in time, I think it's really, really hard to predict. I suppose the real issue for, any exporter to the US, what do we know currently? We know that duties, the reciprocal duties are 10% going into the US. That's what it is now up to the 9th. So maybe what should people be doing? They should be exporting to the US, paying the 10% duty if that's affordable for their US customers. And then for other products, maybe putting it into some kind of warehouse to sort of sit and wait it out a bit. But I think the challenge is it just creates so much uncertainty. I suppose the other thing for businesses to think about is obviously alternative markets.
Yeah.
Should they be developing other markets while all this uncertainty is happening? And then also as well saying, well, if the duties do go up to the levels of 31% for South Africa, you need to be looking at your comparative positioning, saying, okay, well, other countries, are they going to have a higher or lower duty than us on the 9th of July? Because I think if they're going to be implemented, I assume they're going to be implemented for everybody, back up to those reciprocal levels again. So I think it's really looking at that comparative position and do you have a duty advantage over your competitor countries going into the US?
In the US, I presume the bigger issue is China. They finished their talks in London, I think after midnight last night. Trump has tweeted they have a deal. President Xi Jinping still has to agree to it. I'm used to trade-offs in trade, but I did not expect that there'll be a trade-off between, if I've understood this correctly, the China agreeing to export rare earths to the US and the US agreeing to take Chinese students. That's quite a trade-off. But presumably this tension between the US and China will be with us for quite some time and probably have all sorts of knock-on effects for ages.
I mean, but I think we also need to remember that I think the tension between the US and China, predates the Trump administration. So, I do a lot of work in, I suppose, the automotive industry. So there's been lots of tensions in that sector already around software in vehicles. That's not a new issue. Okay. So I think sometimes maybe has it been, I suppose, magnified since the beginning of the year? I think the answer is yes, but I think that those tensions have been there for a while. And I think the challenge is here. It's all about, I suppose, deals, and what are you trading? It's not just tariff for tariffs. It's market access. It's students. It's all kind of issues that are on the table to get a deal done at a transactional level. So the Trump administration can say they've done a deal with China or whoever. And I suppose that's the challenge for all business. There's lots of issues on the table which are outside their control. So if it was in, say, the citrus industry, you know what you got in your control, but actually the issue that's been negotiated is something completely different outside your industry. So I think that's the challenge for all businesses today. Is a lot of the issues are you don't really know what you're negotiating on. And you just need to let it play out to see where can a deal actually be done. Hopefully by the 9th of July, but highly unlikely, as you say.
And no one will invest in the meantime, one way or another. Duane Newman, really appreciate the time. Thank you. EY partner, specializing in global trade.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Chris Stewart's portfolio manager at 91. Well, let's just pick up on that conversation, Chris. Obviously, everybody is waiting to see what's happening with the US and China. And yes, we know some details, but I think markets really waiting for more. All right, just waiting for Chris Stewart to be available for us on The Money Show this evening. He is, of course, your markets analyst and a portfolio manager at 91. So lots to look at when you consider what's been happening on our markets in the last little while. Platinum shares also having a really good day. And you can understand why when you look at the platinum price, which has been much higher over the last sort of 2 weeks than it has been for almost any time before that. So that's been one of the big factors that we've had there. I think, Chris, you've taken yourself, I don't know if you've on mute or maybe taken yourself off mute, but I think he's there now. Chris, good evening again. We were talking about the US and China. The market's still waiting for more details on that deal.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. Certainly, an improved outlook for trade between the US and China has been the driving force behind markets over the last couple of days, propelling indices back to within 2% of all-time highs. That, and I guess a fairly benign inflation print coming out of the US today, when I think the market was sitting on tenterhooks waiting to see if there was early evidence of tariff impacts on US inflation. That not materializing either. That said, not much follow through. US markets trading water, US bond markets, short end rallying a little bit, long end not really responding either. So, yes, I think waiting for good news, and we'll see what direction the market will take from there.
Is it possible to know why US inflation didn't go up? Every economist had said it would. Surely the economists weren't wrong, Chris.
Well, they never are they, Stephen? So, if you analyze the numbers, there's I've read a couple of reports looking through the detail, and the 6-month moving average number still slightly higher than hoped for. But 1 month's data print, I don't think one can start popping the champagne corks just yet. It may be that significant pre-buying that took place prior to the implementation of tariffs means stock can continue to clear without an inflationary impulse. I think it needs to take a few months before pre-tariff stock has cleared, post-tariff stock is hitting the shelves. Possibly wholesalers and retailers have decided that they can't take it on the chin permanently, and price implications start to come through. So probably still a little bit early to say that tariffs aren't going to be inflationary.
Here, MTN starting a book build, and that I'm sure will have an impact on their share price over the next couple of days.
Yeah, there was a very quiet day from the news front, and suddenly post the close, we saw MTN announcing that they will be unwinding the last part of the MTN Sekele BEE transaction, so about 1.3% of MTN's shares being offered in a book build. And I'm just looking at the headlines here saying that offers below 128 Rand risk missing. So it's possible that the placement will be somewhere around that level. The share closed at 132 Rand today. It may be that, some will subscribe for shares at around 128 and think if they can sell them somewhere at a premium to that, albeit below today's close, they'll make a little bit of money. So, we might see a short-term overhang impact, but it's unlikely to be significant and it's unlikely to be particularly long-lasting. It's far more likely that the MTN share price continues to get driven by fundamentals, and with the share price up almost 50% year to date, it's unsurprising that the board decided that this was an opportune time to start to release stock, albeit, I think that window runs out till 2027. So the naysayers will say, why sell now if the prospects of the market, if the prospects of the company are still looking good.
And then Pan African Resources, they had an update today and they've produced a lot of gold.
Yeah, we had Pan African Resources, and also possibly worth mentioning Naspers and Prosus both putting a trading statement out a few minutes ago. So on Pan African Resources, a better second half from a production perspective than their first half, albeit still missing the overall full year guidance that they had given, both from a production and all-in sustaining costs perspective, which for most stocks would be negative. If you miss on production and you miss on costs. However, gold stocks are forward-looking and, guiding to a much better 2026 financial year, both from a production and cost perspective. And with the gold price remaining as solid as it is, the market discounting perhaps the last 6 months' slight operational disappointment and the share managing to gain ground. From a Naspers and Prosus perspective, we know what Tencent has earned, Tencent being a significant proportion of the earnings of those entities. The underlying e-commerce businesses are turning from loss-making in some cases to profitable. That's improving. But if I take the midpoint of the guidance range for core headline earnings per share and I compare that with consensus, it looks as though it's pretty much in line with expectations. And I look at where the ADRs are trading in the US, the American depository receipts, not much movement in either way. So I don't think a big positive or negative surprise to the market.
Chris Stewart, thanks so much. Portfolio manager at 91, just after 6:30.
Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, good to hear from you as always on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. Well, yesterday at this time, you heard the head of marketing and communication at Capitec, Francois Vivier, explaining why they believe the way in which we define employment and unemployment should change, basically to better account for the income that people earn through the informal sector. In other words, they suggest that millions of people who are technically unemployed are doing something and receiving money for it, what I suppose you could call paid work. But today, the Statistician General, Risengo Malaleke, writing in Business Live, explaining why they are sticking to their definition, at least for now. Well, I'm pleased to tell you he's on the line to talk to you directly. Risengo Malaleke, the Statistician General, sir, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. But before we just get into the debate, how do you define an unemployed person?
An unemployed person, Stephen, is someone who is actively looking for employment and may not find employment at any given point of time. But to understand that, we need to start with the concept of employment. So an employed person is someone who is employed by another person or an entity in the form of a company, or is self-employed and works for a minimum of 1 hour a week. So this person who is employed can be working for a big firm in Sandton or Cape Town, or could be selling fat cooks in the street, or selling corn, or selling pap on the roadside, as long as they do that for pay, they are employed, and as long as they work for a minimum of an hour. That is according to the International Labour Organization guideline.
Okay, so the person who's sitting on the corner and selling pap or selling corn, they're not registered with SARS or anyone else. They're part of the informal sector, I presume, but they are employed for your purposes.
Certainly. Remember, when we go to the household and knock at your door, Stephen, we do not know whether you are a taxpayer or a VAT payer or not. So what we do is we ask you if you are employed. You say, I work for a big bank. We get information where you are working. If you say you are employed, or you could readily say, look, I cook at a street corner, or I sell chips at a street corner. Then we'll proceed with what we call the survey of employed, self-employed and employers question. So we ask such questions. So definitely such people are employed.
Okay. You would have seen what Gerrie Fourie from Capitec said yesterday or the day before, basically suggesting that actually there are many, many people, and I must just say their banking data would seem to back it up from what they say, that there are many more people who have an income from somewhere than you're taking account for. And I realize you've looked at what he said, you've written your own response around the definition, and it is an international definition, as you say. Where is the disconnect here? I mean, do you think that people are misunderstanding the term? Are people maybe not saying to you they're employed, but they're getting an income from somewhere? And obviously we don't mean social grants for the purposes of this conversation.
Certainly, a social grant is not what is classified as paid work.
Yeah.
Because one, they are not working for a minimum of an hour, and they are not paid for any services that they have rendered. So social grants don't form part of that. You can pick it up in the income and expenditure survey. But what happens here is that we need to understand that definitely when you look at people who say they are unemployed, there could be one or two people who could say they are unemployed for purposes of whatever reason they may have. But in the law of large numbers, that diminishes. That is number one. Number two is, I have no reason whatsoever to believe that members of the public are always misleading us in relation to their employment status. Because this data that we are collecting has been showing a consistency over time in relation to how employment occurs. So at some stage, definitely would have picked it up. So let's start here, Stephen. There are 63 million people in South Africa. 41.7 million are in the labor force, that is aged 15 to 64 years. 25 million are in the labor force. They are either employed or unemployed. Where you can say 16.8 million are employed and 8.2 million are unemployed. If we were to take what Mr. Fourie is saying, that the unemployment rate of South Africa is 10%, out of the 25 million, it would mean that we have 2.5 million people who are unemployed in South Africa. Now, I've gone to field work in different parts of the country. I have seen more people unemployed. So that is the first thing. The second issue is that in the income and expenditure, people told us that 68.8% of their household income comes from work. The other income comes from remittances, grants, and other input, whether it's financial investments, especially in some well-to-do communities. But that is not work. From our side as status say, we don't classify money that you get from grants or remittances as work. You have to be working to earn a salary. So now, what we see is that the informal sector, and we release that data every quarter, it says that in the last quarter of the first quarter of 2025, there are 3.3 million people who are employed in the informal sector. So it's not like we haven't been measuring the informal sector. We have been reporting on it. But Mr. Fourie says he sees more deposits going into their bank, Capitec. So that I can't explain from what members of the public are telling us, because official statistics is about what, especially from a social point of view, like the Total Labor Force Survey, is what people tell us. We only say what they say.
So I mean, I understand that. And I mean, I think this is a silly question, but let me put it to you so that you can tell me it's a silly question. Could people be misunderstanding what work is? That a job is a formal thing when it's not? I mean, it seems unlikely to me that would be the case. People know what work is.
They are not misunderstanding that, because we do explain to them when we are asking them such questions.
Okay.
So I will say we do ask, do you go and work and cook at a street corner? In the past, historically, people would always ask you, umlungu wakho ubani? Imani mlungu wawena? Who is your white man who hires you? Because the whites were the ones who were generally hiring people in the country. But where we are now, people know that even when you work in a private household, we have 1.1 million people working in the private household. And when we say informal sector, we don't include those who work in agriculture. Agriculture is 930,000. So when you take 930,000 plus 1.1 million of the people who work in private households and the 3.3 million, those could be the people who are depositing money into Capitec. But I can't say, my job is not to speculate, is to measure what happens. But there is also an issue here, Stephen, that I need to mention to the listeners. We do not have a register of informal businesses in South Africa. Unlike formal businesses that are VAT paying. So when we say informal, we are saying someone who works for themselves and sell at the street corner, or someone who hires not more than 5 people, and all those people are not paying VAT. So when you go to the SARS to get the business register, which we use in other economic surveys, you can't find them because they are not paying VAT. So we rely on them having to respond to us at their households when we visit them.
Rusenga Malaleka, thank you very much indeed. The Statistician General of South Africa. All right then, an explanation from Stats SA on this issue. There are a lot more questions, I think, around. And I would just make one caution that sometimes, because unemployment is so bad and a blight upon our society, maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of wishful thinking in this debate. I'm now not sure. Your view, 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
There's been some reporting today that the business rescue practitioner at the airline Mango might be about to announce some sort of deal or sale or investment that could see the airline returning to the skies. There's a complication, of course. Mango, you may remember, is part of SAA. It was the sort of low-cost SAA airline before COVID. And at one point, it appeared that during the state capture era, SAA had been subsidizing it. Potejo Majapele is an expert on aviation. Potejo, good evening. Do we need another low-cost airline in our skies at the moment?
Good evening, Stephen. Yes, we do need another competitor that can offer a very competitive prices on the market. And as to whether Mango is the right choice for that, I think there's more to it that we could talk about before we could even think about Mango to come back into our skies.
I mean, I made the point earlier that SAA, if I've flown SAA once in the last year, has a sense of nostalgia for me. Mango, I don't think that brand was nearly as strong. I remember it for other things.
Yeah, it was not. It wasn't really that strong as the likes of Comair in a brand of Kulula would have been. And I'm sure if somebody would come and say, look, in between Mango and Kulula, what is it that you would, which airline would you choose? I'm sure Kulula would have done much better. But in this case, I do believe that I think what the business rescue practitioner is trying to do is to basically clear himself from all the work that he has been doing and the money that has been paid on trying to rescue the airline. As you know that in the past, the late Minister Godin, they have been taking each other to court when he was trying to get the airline or his recommendation for the airline to come to place. But it hasn't been successful. That's why you see even SAA today releasing the statement saying they are not necessarily party to what he's been saying.
Poteko, on another issue, and it may just be anecdotally, and if you say that, I'll absolutely accept it, but it seems to me there are more flight delays at the moment, even with airlines that have a strong track record for punctuality. There seem to be more delays, longer queues at airports. Is something sort of going on? Is something shifted?
Yeah, there is a lot of things going on in particularly in our airports in South Africa. There's quite a lot of things going on. Even if you go globally, you would realize that in New York, particularly where we operate, New Jersey, there has been quite a lot of delays around that airport. And all the airlines that are coming out of that, they've been delays. But there seems to be quite a lot of changes in the industry, which either being one of the things is that the labor issues, I know for a fact they affected most of the airlines that are operating, and also the airlines are really trying to fish out on the best ways possible to try and reduce the operating costs. But they come with a lot of cost in terms of implementing strategies that they want to implement. But indeed, you are quite right, Stephen. There is a trend that is very much growing in the industry right now of airlines being late or cancelled, and it's growing quite badly lately.
Poteko Mochapele, thanks very much indeed. Aviation expert, really do appreciate the time. All right, I thought maybe it was just me. That was the answer I was preparing for. But I do wonder if you've had that experience recently. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Good evening, you with the Money Show. Don't forget, Saki Maklzoma. He'll be your shapeshifter in half an hour from now at 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, powering Africa's potential from ground to grid. Proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the program. Well, we'll talk business unusual in just a moment. How important it is to have a sense of mission. How important it is to know what your company is actually doing. And there are plenty of sort of workplace TV series about the kind of boredom, the inanity, the kind of pointlessness of work. Plenty of them. But actually knowing what your company is doing does change the game. And then don't forget your consumer ninja, Wendy Knowler. She'll be talking about younger people and buying cars. You can imagine some of the stories. And don't forget your very special shapeshifter this evening, Saki Maklzoma, in your studio this evening. Just went to go and shake his hand. Now, in fact, really looking forward to that conversation in a few moments. Good to hear from you as well on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. And of course, voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on X
at Stephen Grootes.
I see that I suppose you would call them supplier, illegal supplier, the company that was enabling people to illegally use Starlink in South Africa has decided to stop doing that. And they say they're doing that because they don't want to overshadow the debate. Very gracious of them. And in some ways, what they did was reveal how difficult it is to kind of regulate an international service provided by satellite in South Africa. And they managed to put a little bit of attention on that, if that was their aim. At the same time, though, you can't really encourage someone to break the law. And at the same time, there's this idea, I think, that Starlink somehow has become kind of totemic, symbolic of so many different things. It's very, very rare that one service ends up sparking debates around black economic empowerment, debates around the legality of certain laws, the rationality of certain laws. And at the bottom of it all is what increased connectivity would actually do for South Africa. And I know there are plenty of people who believe it will change our world. Well, it'll change the lives of some people, absolutely. But don't forget, it's still fairly expensive in relative terms. It will get cheaper, yes, but it will probably only get cheaper when there's competition, not before then. And then the other problem, of course, is you tell me, you predict what Elon Musk is going to do, because I have no idea.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
Do you know why you are going to work, what you're doing at work, why it matters every day? I mean, it may just be to pay the bills, and we've all been in a position where we do that, but also about a greater purpose. Do you know where you fit in your organization? All of this could matter to the bottom line and to your bottom line. And Sipiwe Moyo is the organizational behavioral specialist. Sipiwe, good evening. I mean, so often you can just do something because you have to do it, because it's, what used to be called the 9 to 5. How important is it to know why what you are doing is important?
Adam Grant and his colleagues ran an interesting experiment where, how call center environments are just absolutely stressful. So there was this call center environment in a university, and these young people who were in the call center were calling former students, alumni, to be able to fundraise so that they can fund other students, so a bursary fund of some sort. So it's a repetitive job, it's a thankless job, but something interesting, people were really, really demotivated until they decided to do an experiment. One group of these callers was given 5 minutes interaction with the student who actually benefited from the scholarship. So they came in contact with the beneficiary of this scholarship. So no new script. They did no training, just a story from a real human being. You know what's happened then? The group who met the scholarship recipient raised over 5 times more money after that than before, and they spent nearly double the time on the phone, all from just that 5 minutes intervention. It's what in the organizational behavior space we call task significance. It really does matter why you do something, because when you do, there's some intrinsic motivation that just makes you show up differently.
I mean, there's also, I think, and I worry that young people have been told over the last sort of generation that you can do whatever you want and that what you do must matter. A lot of jobs don't really matter, or a lot of jobs don't change the world, but they must still be done. How important is a sense of purpose? I mean, I've been very lucky in my career. I've had a sense of purpose kind of from the start. And even in difficult times when I've had difficult relationships with companies, I've still got out of bed and gone and done it and looked forward to doing it.
Yeah, it is absolutely crucial, and I think it's the idea that thinking about a work that matter. It's very easy to see how significant your job is. If you're a teacher, you're a nurse, you're a doctor, you're literally just saving lives. But finding significance and meaning in any job is very, very possible, Stephen. So, for example, you work in a bank and you process some home loans, and you can get so bogged up in that admin and that you forget that because you went to work, someone has a home. Someone who might not have an opportunity to have a home for a very long time now has an opportunity to build a home. So what we call meaning making. So the ability to connect something that you do on a day-to-day basis to some bigger goal that really, really inspires you. It's very, very important. I think you are so correct that there are jobs where that sense of purpose and meaning is obvious, but it is still fundamentally important for anyone to be able to connect what I do on a day-to-day basis with something bigger. Otherwise, it's just repetitive. It is mundane. I rely on incentives. I rely on pay. But as we know, pay is something that we get used to. There comes a point where you've budgeted for this and you no longer see a significance in your level of motivation. So it's crucial for you to also create your own meaning.
Your example of the, meeting someone, talking to someone who benefits from what you're doing is huge. And I imagine in most companies, can you imagine, for some jobs, you can sort of see what the impact is. If you're someone who, cleans the staff kitchen for a living, you know what the impact of that is. How important is it for companies, management, maybe other employees to kind of examine the impact of what they're doing? What's the phrase I'm looking for? It has a ripple effect so often.
it has such a ripple effect, Stephen. And I think leaders, it's very important for leaders to think about this very carefully. So once in a while, put people in direct contact with their beneficiaries. So like the recipients in the study, just make people aware of their ultimate aim, because whatever I do in ops, in finance, ultimately I'm servicing a customer, and it's really, really helping. And a little bit of storytelling, if you can't have access to the people who benefit maybe from our work, some storytelling helps. So leaders must collect some of these stories, collect some of this impact, and be able to tell those stories internally, because it really, really does help. And I guess also the idea that leaders must frame the work in terms of purpose, not just performance. I think, in my view, one of the most powerful things a manager can say is not only good job, but let me just show you how your work has helped us in this organization. Let me show you how what you have done has reduced stock loss, has reduced some of the challenges we have, and that is an absolute great motivator for anybody who needs some kind of motivation.
Is this properly understood? Is it properly used by managers? Just explaining to people why they should, the impact of what they do. I mean, are they people maybe missing that? They're missing a lever.
I think many leaders just don't understand the power of this, Stephen. I think, I get a lot of pushback, like, can we just get on with it, please? Why is it that we're always trying to motivate people, increase their satisfaction, increase their... but I think many leaders underestimate the power of why. And I think one of my favorite stories is this security guard I bumped into who won an award and who kept winning all these awards, who said, for me, all I'm doing is to try and make sure that my kids don't start where I started. And for him, he had managed to self-motivate. But I think leaders must never underestimate this. In fact, just by communicating purpose, you will get more done than direct supervision. When you directly supervise people and you micromanagement, they will do what you want them to do when you are there. And as soon as you are not there, they are going to continue with everything else that they're doing.
Sapiwe Moyo, thank you so much, the organizational behavioral specialist.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
So I don't know if you remember the first car not the first car that you drove, but the first car you actually bought, how old you were at the time. You might have a younger person in your family. You're watching them go through that right now, or you're going through that right now. There's a new Youth Barometer Report from Standard Bank. They're looking at younger people, 18 to 35, and how they're managing their money and what that says about how they're managing their car. Wendy Knowler, your consumer ninja, joins us now. Wendy, I know so many people who've had trouble with cars at that age. Yes. And it really is something that it can happen. It can happen very, very easily. What did the survey find?
Okay, so it didn't only look at car buying, but I'm very interested in that area, and car issues make up the bulk of complaints into my inbox every week. So obviously I zoned in on that. So about what the bank is seeing in the patterns that are emerging with young adult clients buying cars. For many, the car is the first asset they buy before property. It's the first big asset. And it obviously is then their catalyst into the first insurance purchase, because the banks require their finance cars to be comprehensively insured. So just under 40% of the bank's vehicle finance customers are aged between 18 and 35. So young adults, it's quite a big chunk. And I was lucky enough to get financial help from my parents. In fact, I inherited a car from my mother when she got a new car. Very lucky I was. But interestingly, the bank says that unlike with housing finance, where sometimes there's some co-signing or financial assistance from parents, this is extremely rare in vehicle finance, making this, as I said, a very significant purchase. And it's also evident that they're on their own, because if you consider that most of them don't put down a down payment at all. So between January of last year and now, May 2025, 65.1% of youth who financed cars with Standard Bank did so without a deposit. That is huge.
Sure, that's a lot.
And the interest implications are massive, as you can imagine.
So people are basically paying a lot of money on finance at this age, and they're spending, I presume that then becomes a big portion actually of their income on car finance.
Yeah, exactly. So in this age group, adults under 35, their average installment to income ratio sits at 16.7%, which is quite a bit higher than the average for customers over 35, which is 11.4%. So they are spending quite a disproportional amount of their income financing their first set of wheels. And then this, which is always comes into the equation, because when you're sitting in a car dealership with the finance and insurance person, what they want to do is get you to a monthly installment that you can afford, and they'll do all sorts of things, and normally that involves a balloon payment, right? So, okay, you can't afford 8,000 Rand a month. All right, we're just going to take, whatever, a huge chunk of this to one side. We'll put it over there. Don't worry about it. You can worry about it in 6 years' time. So 41% of the youth, not too different from the older customers, admittedly, but 41% of car buyers up to the age of 35 are, 41.4 in fact, are financing their cars with a balloon payment.
Sure.
But actually, because of their affordability issues, they are paying a slightly smaller percentage of, they're putting aside a smaller percentage to worry about later, which is something. Yeah.
I have to say, if it were me, I think a balloon payment would be illegal. I don't know how you would do that legally, but I just think it's asking for trouble.
I agree, and people don't understand what the full implications of it are. They just focused, and the finance people know this, and the dealerships, they're focused on that monthly installment. And they're not really looking at how it's arrived at. And the balloon is, 6 years' time for a young person is forever. We won't worry about it,
It's also, isn't it also being driven by, I want this car, I want to drive it now. And I understand that. I've been there. And that kind of drives that sense of just signing anything without even really understanding what it's going to mean.
Yeah, exactly. But the one statistic that did surprise me, and I think it's just an affordability thing, but I assumed that most of them would be wanting to, so aspirational to want to buy a new car. But only 27% in that bracket opted for new cars. These are Standard Bank vehicle and asset finance clients. So most of them bought a used car. 73% of them did that. But the bad news there, Stephen, is that, it is a very good deal if you know what you're about, and you know the cars, and you know the pitfalls, and you have them checked out professionally if you don't have the wherewithal to do that. But my inbox tells me that that's not the norm.
Yeah.
And so that presents a huge danger then, those used cars.
What are people buying? I mean, what are they interested in?
This part didn't surprise me, because I know the sales figures. Volkswagen is the top choice, 19.3% of those
I could even tell you the
clients.
model, yes.
Yes, exactly. Finest VW brands, and of course we know those are mostly Polos, followed by Toyota and Suzuki. There are a couple of Chinese models coming through in the bank's top 10 most financed cars, most notably Chery.
Are these balloon payments, I mean, they must have a longer term effect. So we're talking about sort of younger people, but when people get into their 30s, I mean, are you finding that actually one of the reasons is because of car finance deals? I mean, you're losing money for quite a long period of time, or it takes you a while to recover in your 20s. That knocks on.
It does, and I think I love looking at data, and especially when you compare different sets of data. So you got the bank saying, okay, people are buying, 41% of their clients are taking these balloon payment deals. Earlier this year, the head of South Africa's largest debt counselling firm, Debt Busters, run by Benay Sager, said he singled out car loans as determining whether customers are doing well financially in their 30s or not. Because that people are applying to them to go under debt counselling when they're not doing well in their 30s. He says between the ages of 25 and 30, many people will take a car loan of between 203 and 400,000 Rand, not comprehending what they are getting themselves into. Many of the applicants for debt counselling didn't realise that they even had a balloon payment or factored it in with all the other associated costs of owning a car, such as insurance, servicing and maintenance. And this is so sobering. The main reason for someone in their 30s not doing well is that they overstretched themselves in a car finance deals in their 20s. And he says when they're sitting down and doing this financial assessment with a debt counsellor, many do not even factor in the outstanding balloon payments, which are, in the tens of thousands, when they are asked to put down their debt burden, list everything. He says, I really believe many of them do not understand what a balloon payment is. And so that is really, really alarming for me. And here I'm putting out an open invitation, Stephen. I've done this several times, not lately. Given what I see in my inbox, I wish that people would reach out to me before they sign that offer to purchase, the OTP, and not afterwards, when they are saddled with a loan with too much interest and risk, extra insurance or security products they could have done without or sourced themselves for much less, admin fees they could have negotiated down, and of course, that's just the finance side. A car, that's a bit of a lemon. So certainly on the finance side, I mean, I can't go inspecting cars, although I can direct people how to get them inspected before they buy. But that OTP, I am
the offer to
really
purchase,
willing and able. Yes, send it to me. You've got 5 days by law where that quote must stand, and I will help you. Please take this up if you're a rookie buyer.
That's really good advice, Wendy. Thank you. I mean, part of it is, and I mean, it drives me mad. They put the ribbon on the car. Inside the car, they put gifts. You actually pay for the grape Tizer or whatever it is.
Yes.
And I'm like, really? I mean, at one point they financed that before. I can't remember which would stop them. But I mean, some of what the car dealers do, and they're like, you can drive it now. It's Friday. You can have it for the weekend. It's chaos.
It's too much on the whole flash side of it. Let's post it on social media. It's very aspirational. I get that. But yes, in that service and delivery fee, which they used to call on the road until it attracted a lot of attention, that's all. You're paying for everything. The real test of how a dealership cares about you, or if they do it all, is when the first thing goes wrong. And then please write to me about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, pre-loved car salesman, you know what they say.
Yes.
Wendy Knowler, thanks so much. Your consumer ninja. And take her up on that. You'll be able to find her address very easily, her email address, but take her up on that. The offer to purchase, send it through. She'll look at it for you. And take it from someone who knows, take a friend, take a parent. Sheesh, take a parent. It's always a good idea. Doesn't have to be your own. You can take someone else's, but often a very good idea. Wendy Knowler, your consumer ninja. Thanks very much indeed.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Shapeshifters is brought to you by Volvo. It's safe to be brave with Volvo. Well, we're very lucky this evening to have someone who really has led and is still leading the most interesting of careers, the most interesting of lives. He's currently the chair of Vodacom and Safika Holdings. He has several other titles as well. And I'm talking, of course, about Saki Makozoma. Saki, good evening, and thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I have a very long list of questions about your business career, one or two about politics. I do want to start, though, because that information is quite freely available, with asking you what kind of community you were growing up in. What was your family like when you were growing up?
Well, I grew up in two places. I was born in Port Elizabeth in KwaZakele. So that was my primary family. I was sent to the Transkei to a place called All Saints Mission, Anglican Mission in Engcobo district to stay with my parents. One of the reasons, my grandparents, one of the reasons my parents gave for sending me there was with the introduction of Xhosa as a medium of instruction in the school. They said, you better go back to the mission and go and learn proper English.
Sure. How do you feel about that now? Because, I mean, the way we view language has changed completely.
I think it was good for me in the sense that I have the foundation, and I think the best foundation in education that I could get from All Saints. I am also an urban person in the sense that I did all my high school in Port Elizabeth. So for me, where I was really conscious was in Port Elizabeth when I was at high school. And that community was about a number of things, but one of the most prominent things was sport. And sport was rugby and cricket and other, kind of indoor sports, and boxing as well. And therefore, sports was very, very important in our upbringing. And when we read the newspaper, you started from the back page, from the sport page, and then went the opposite direction.
Do you play all three of those sports?
I used to play rugby, and I played more soccer than any of those, but I follow all of them.
You were in the Eastern Cape, in the Transkei, I mean, the sort of hotbed of the ANC. I mean, that's where the ANC comes from in many ways, sort of, that area. How did you end up in politics? I mean, where did it come from? Was there a family link? Did something happen along the way?
No, it came when I was a child. All Saints Mission was a place where there were Anglican nuns from Europe, as well as the priest in charge was always an English-speaking person. And because there's a hospital there, I became conscious very early of disparities. I became conscious of diseases such as kwashiorkor because I had aunts who were working at the hospital. And that image stayed with me for a very long time. But I'm talking about the early 60s then, and the so-called silent 60s. So there wasn't much political activity in that area at that time. We had a priest, Father Ganga, who got arrested from time to time. We didn't quite know, what was going on. The political consciousness came about later when I was in PE mostly, and it came through sport. When SACCOS came about with a slogan that you can play normal sport in an abnormal society. And so all of a sudden, whilst we were following sports, there was politics there. And there was resistance built into sport. For instance, in rugby, we broke away to what was called the KwaZakele Rugby Union, or Kwaru, which was one of the prominent black rugby playing teams in the country. And the same thing in soccer with people like Aaron Rensbeck. We broke away and created a non-racial soccer board. And so the correlation between sport and political consciousness was very strong.
Cheeky Watson was doing the same. Wasn't he involved in some of that?
Yes, he was. The Watson brothers were doing that. And in fact, they broke away from the Eastern Province to go and play rugby in the townships. And that was pretty something in those days.
So you ended up in politics. You ended up being arrested. You did end up on Robben Island. And all of that must have been very, very difficult times for you and for your family. And you came back to South Africa. I'm trying to remember the date in which you were released. It was before 94, was it not?
Yes. I was arrested in 1976 and sentenced in 1977. And I spent those years on Robben Island. So I was released in 1981. And yes, it was a very difficult time, but one took a view. There were two other options things that could have happened to me. One was I would have left the country anyway and gone into exile. The other one would have been I could have died in the 76 uprising, as many people did. And in a sense, there was a relief that when you're in jail, you're in jail. They can't jail you twice. But to arrive there as a high school student at the age of 18, 19, it's not easy. Jail is not easy for anybody. But I think the spirit that we found and created for ourselves was very sustaining. One of the things I did when I got to Robben Island was actually that very year that I arrived to write my matric and pass it. And so there was always also a purpose of advancement. And I always tell people that when I got to Robben Island, I remembered what my grandmother used to say: they should never take away what they brought that you have in. And so my resolve to myself was, whatever happens here, what I came in with should be better than what and they won't take away what I brought here.
It's quite a story in a way. And I'm sure it was tougher than you explain it.
Oh, yeah, of course, there are moments. There are moments. There's never enough food. When we arrived, we slept on sisal mats. But we fought. Yeah. And in the end, in that kind of prison, you have an equilibrium for 2 years or a year or something like that. A new warder comes, or head of the prison comes and changes things, and you go back into fighting mode. But what I do remember are the hunger strikes as well. And I remember when we were doing a hunger strike, we used to call it a Bobby Sands, because there was one in Ireland where Bobby Sands died as a result of a hunger strike. And fighting over those kinds of methods and moderating people, I think taught me how to negotiate, how to get along with other people, and how not to judge too harshly.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit, if you don't mind, and you come out of prison. Eventually, we have elections. Nelson Mandela becomes the president. You become a member of parliament for the ANC. And then a couple of years after that, you become the CEO, you become the managing director, I think it was called then, of Transnet. What informed that decision? Why did you decide to go in that direction from being an MP?
It had never entered my mind to quote a jazz standard. But what happened is that I got somebody who said, I want to see you. And Minister Stella Strau has asked me to speak to you. So I went to see him on a Sunday, I remember. And he said, Minister Strau says, I should tell you to consider joining the management of Transnet because she is in the process of overhauling it and putting people into that. Subsequently, I went to have a discussion with Minister Strau, and I also went to have a discussion with President Mandela and also Deputy President Beki at that time, saying, should I go this direction or should I stay in Parliament? And both said to me, we seem to have the politics stabilized enough. What we are lacking is people who think like us in the broader economy. And to the extent that this will work, we suggest that you should take it. So I had never intended to do it, and I never thought. And I said, well, I don't have experience in transport in any manner. I've got a bit of economics education, but on the other hand, I don't have to fly an aeroplane or pilot a boat or anything. What I do know is where this country is going and ought to go. And therefore, what are the things that we need to do to make sure that this important muscle of the South African economy behaves inappropriately to the change that is happening?
What was it like coming into an organization like that as the boss? And I imagine it was an organization that, where were we, 1995, 1996, isn't very transformed.
No, it's not. And I'm fortunate that I came in as a deputy manager and director. There was Dr. Anton Mollman, who was the managing director. And I spent a couple of months, maybe 6 months, without any real work. I mean, like all deputies, I guess at certain points. And I used the time to try and understand the organization. So I took everybody who was reporting to me and said, please tell me what you do. Not what your title says or anything. They've got that on their organogram. Just tell me when you wake up and go to work, what do you do? And of course, they would explain. And some of them would be pretty condescending and say, well, you won't understand, however. But what I was trying to understand was, where were the levers that actually could lead us to the change that we wanted. When I became managing director, one of the first things I did was to get a consulting company to come and help me understand all the moving parts so that when we start doing things and making changes, we would be clear as to what we're trying to achieve and whether that's the correct lever for that particular change.
You got involved in lots of different things, and you sort of you left there eventually, and you got involved in private business, and you had a sort of stratospheric, a very quick trajectory after that. I do want to ask you just a little bit about what was going on in sort of 2005, because I was reporting on you as a political reporter at the time. You were being followed by the State Security Agency under Billy Masetle. He had a falling out with Thabo Mbeki, the Constitutional Court case from that, the consequences we still live with today, because if you're fired from government, you get all of the payment of that salary and all the rest. Let me put it like this. It must have been very difficult for you to find yourself being spied on, to have to report it. You were still in the NEC at the time. None of that could have been easy.
Not at all. I think the more painful part of it was that these were comrades. These are the people that you rub shoulders with and had a common objective as far as we thought at that point in time. But what was also more difficult was children going to school and coming back and say, they say your dad is at school. They say my dad is a spy. That happened to Bulela Ngcuka later on, which seems to be a similar kind of tactic. When I look back to that, I regret, but that was the beginning of the decay, I think, in the ANC. Not because it happened to me, but there was a systemic approach to getting rid of certain people who, in the minds of other people in the ANC, constituted the other end, and perhaps people who they felt were too liberal or too ambitious, because there was also that, who is intending to run for president or has potential. Sometimes, in my case, I had never, and then of course there was a hoax emails.
Yeah,
which was subsequent to that, and that I found very, very difficult. It was really difficult. Fortunately, the people who were doing it were so inept.
Yeah.
If they had ChatGPT and AI today, I don't think that would have prevailed to prove that these were hoax emails.
Do you blame Jacob Zuma for all of that?
No, I don't think any one individual can be blamed. But some individuals, of course, enable this more than other individuals, and therefore it's a systemic issue as far as I'm concerned. But the results of that was everything that we got with state capture and the Guptas and subsequent happenings.
I know you joined COPE for a little bit, but how do you feel about the ANC now? You were part of it for a long time. You represented it in Parliament.
I'll always feel a lot about the ANC, and even then, the issue was the ANC will always be an important factor in our society. I wish that the renewal was what it can be, and I think the various iterations and attempts to try and change the trajectory of the ANC, unfortunately, have not succeeded, and it's a tragic thing. And I think about people like Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu and others. If they were to see where we are. But we've always, the enemy of the ANC was always within, which is disunity and careerism and people trying to get rich quick.
We're speaking to the chair of Vodacom this evening. He's the chair of Safika Holdings as well, Saki Macalzoma. If you think it's interesting now, just wait till I ask about black economic empowerment. It's 8 minutes now to 8.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Your shapeshifter this evening, Saki Macalzoma, the chair of Vodacom and Safika Holdings, has many other titles and has held many other titles along the way as well. Saki, I mentioned that I would ask you about black economic empowerment, and it seems to me that black economic empowerment, and to an extent the concept of race-based redress, is under more pressure in South Africa now than it's been for probably 20 years. And I would suggest there are two reasons for that. The one is Trump. The second is that the DA is now in the coalition government. And so it's kind of caught in this pincer movement. And there are people, when I speak on a stage and someone will ask a question, will BE survive? You can see an expectation in the audience sometimes. Will you defend BE? Do you believe it's still the right policy for us to follow?
Absolutely. I think people should just understand a very simple thing. You cannot have a political settlement without an economic consequence. And we were forced to compromise on radical economic transformation, to use that terminology, at the time of negotiations. And what we needed most then was stability, to stabilize the country and then deal with certain issues in the fullness of time, if you like. And therefore, one of the things we did in the negotiations on the Constitution was to make sure that the Constitution allows black economic empowerment. It wasn't even called that then, but allows redress. Precisely because we understood that there's no such a thing that we can have a group of people of a certain hue holding political power and another group of people with a different hue holding economic power. That's a recipe for disaster. And a lot of poor people in the process, and so until we have reached a certain particular equilibrium in between those two forces in society, we will always have tumultuous times. Would I defend it? Yes, absolutely. I believe that empowering people who have been previously disadvantaged is the right kind of thing. It may be that the terminology of black economic empowerment is the one that creates the emotion, if you like, especially if you think about foreigners. The fact of the matter is that we need to have the redress, and we have not done it to the extent that we should have. And I am also aware of the fact that I would not have done the kinds of things that I've done in my life if I had not had the opportunity granted to me by the policy of redress. And then some of our people now, they say, no, I'm a businessman, I'm not a BE. Well, I'm a businessman too. And but I accept that this is where we came from. Yes, there have been mistakes made. Most of the accusations, though, about empowering a few people, to me, don't hold water, because BEE was not going to address the entire issue. It was going to address particularly how companies, and big companies in particular, deal with deracialization. And when that happens, the people who will have, obviously, advantage either because they have political influence or they have the right combination of education and influence, or they just at the right place at the right time. But eventually we came to a conclusion that BEE required to be codified in such a way that we're able to deal with it in a balanced way. What is the training and education that takes place? What about promotion into positions? Now, that whole sector or group of people who are beneficiaries of the BEE policies are the ones who are decision makers in the economy now and will be in the future. And hopefully that will continue until the economy is deracialized.
We've got literally 30 seconds left. Do you ever believe our economy will be deracialized? Sometimes I think transformation moves very slowly, and sometimes it looks like it's moving quickly.
It will be deracialized. I think it's inevitable, the force of it. In what time frame, I know nobody can tell. But an essential ingredient of deracializing the South African economy is growth. It's a growth of the economy that will actually ultimately make sure that everybody gets the opportunity.
And government's not growing it now.
Governments aren't there to grow. The governments are there to create the infrastructure and to create the atmosphere and to create the right regulations for that kind of thing. But growth is enabling citizens to take charge of their lives and to create value in the future.
Sakimak Tlzoma, we could go on for another hour. Well, I've enjoyed it. I don't know if you have, but thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming in. Sakimak Tlzoma is the chair of Vodacom and Safika Holdings, and as you've heard, many, many other titles as well.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, of course, brought to you by ABSA CIB, powering Africa's potential from ground to grid. Proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025. Back again tomorrow. Good evening, 8 o'clock.